Hello, welcome to Infinite Prattle. On today's show, as you can see, it's another video episode. Very, very special guest, Kat, who's going to be talking to us today about empathy and grief and loss, and talking about some of the stuff she's been through and how she's coping with it and what she's doing now. So let's get into that. You're listening to Infinite Prattle with your host, Stephen. Thanks for joining me for unscripted, unedited, everything. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Infinite Prattle. And I have a wonderful guest, Kat, with me today. Hi, Kat. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. Very well. We've been trying to get this episode done for a while, haven't we? So I'm really pleased that we're finally getting around to it now. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to you. And I was hoping you were going to be the first video guest, but it didn't work out like that. And Dex got that honour, so I apologise for
Dex
that.
did get that honour, and I actually really enjoyed watching Dex's episodes as well. They were
Yeah,
fantastic.
we may have some plans and a foot in the future for us both, to be honest, because we enjoyed each other.
Sounds wonderful.
We enjoyed chatting to each other that much, so more on that soon, probably. Anyway, enough about me. Today is about you, and basically what you are going to talk about on the show is grief and loss and some of the things that you've been through, one major event that you went through, and kind of how you're coping with that. And I don't know whether it's going to be 2 episodes or 1 episode. We don't really know yet. As everything on this show is really well planned, so if we go into 2, the listener will know, because it'll either say part 1 or just a normal episode. So so tell us about, firstly, the loss is probably the big thing to start with. So tell us about that, if you would.
I suppose to tell you about the loss, I need to tell you a little bit about the background to it. So about how and that does go on a little. So Prattle is definitely the right thing for me as well. I am absolutely a prattler, whether it's the Irish genes or not. I'm not sure. But
that's what I blame all the time, to be fair. So that's what I'll go with.
No need to kiss the blarney here. It's a natural gift.
Definitely.
So I moved over from Ireland to the UK 17 years ago when I met my then husband. It sounds awful to say my first husband, my then husband online. And we married and we had a son, and we divorced 7 years later. And I was working, so we both work at Network Rail. That's how we know each other.
And I work at Network Rail as well. That's how I know you. So the connection is railway.
Yeah, big shout out for the railway there. But I was working on Piccadilly Station, and I was on Piccadilly as a shift manager for about 9.5 years. It was the best and worst job that I've ever had, all rolled into one. It was just an incredible job. It was very hard to leave. And John was a British Transport Police PCSO. So we would pass it on a shift and just, smile at each other and ask how each other's divorces were going. And I'd never even considered him as a person outside of his uniform. It was just, he was another picture in the station jigsaw, the people you meet on shift. And one day, quite a bit after my divorce had been finalized, I was on the tram going home, and I had been supposed to meet a friend for dinner, and that friend had declined something else to do. So I met John on the tram. He was in civvies and he was going home, and he said, "How you're heading home late?" I said, "Yeah, I was stood up for dinner," basically laughing. He said, "Oh, take me to dinner," and I just passed it off, didn't think anything of it. And again, shifts in the night, we came and went around each other on shift. Then he had reason to, in a professional capacity, ask me to help sort out some antisocial behaviour. That was, I know, so romantic. That was happening underneath the arches. Underneath the arches on Piccadilly Station. And in a professional capacity, I had to get another member of the team to contact me.
Yeah.
And he did that, but he also left his personal mobile number.
Right.
They don't have, obviously, police mobiles. It was the only way that I was going to be able to get in touch with him. So I contacted him about this issue, and I said, I've sorted it all, put a ticket through, that they're going to put up some antisocial preventative fencing and stuff. So it's, you won't have to go and patrol in that area anymore. It's all going to be fine and dandy. And so between us, we managed to sort out some antisocial behaviour that was happening on Fairfield Street in Manchester. But then also we started to text casually, and then that turned into not so casually, and we met in Starbucks for coffee. And he came in his, as I said, in his civvies, and he just turned to look at me, and I noticed this pair of blue eyes that I had never noticed before. I don't know why, maybe because he wasn't wearing his glasses. And he sat down, and on that coffee, which wasn't even a date, we just said we would meet and chat in person. We agreed that we would do a round trip of Ireland together.
Really? Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And, neither of us were kind of making any assumptions, but it was, obvious that there was chemistry there. And, he kind of coyly said, we don't have to share a room. And I said, oh, well, it's obviously going to be cheaper if we only book one, kind of thing. And over the next few months, things just, I can't even describe. Just to go back again a little, a few months previously, I had been doing the online dating thing, and it was horrendous. And I kind of thought, I had one date where I asked a chap if he'd like to see me again, and he said maybe. And I walked away, and I thought, I don't want maybe in my life. I've just had a failed marriage. I'm done with maybe. I want fireworks. And then along comes John, and he's Mr. Flipping Fireworks. Like, our first kiss was like only a little thing, but on the tram stop at Shoot Hill, like, something out of a movie.
Oh yeah.
Each of us going back to our homes for the evening, and from there on, life was just something else. He was that kind of a person. He had served 22 years in the Navy, so he was bawdy as all get out. Typical sailor. Honestly. Could swear for England.
I was about to say that. Was he a swearer? Anyone that I've known in the Navy, they can swear.
Not only can they swear, they're basically obliged to swear. Yeah, they're trained to. He used to say he went on a 22-year drinking course. And I know there are mentions in some of your other episodes about the Antarctic and stuff, the stories he could tell about, icebreaking expeditions to the Antarctic. And in fact, I have a piece of Antarctic ice still in my freezer in a Tesco bag.
Really?
But that's a story for another time.
Interesting.
So, honest to goodness, over the next 4 years, we just had the most incredible, really, life together, because he was on duty the night of the Manchester Arena bombing.
Wow.
So he was on duty at Manchester Victoria Station. We weren't living together at that stage, and in fact we had only been together, that was May 2017, so we'd only been together formally since the previous November. He just went into work on a night shift. I had been messaging him previously. He'd had a decent sleep in the afternoon, and it was the Ariana Grande concert. He said they weren't expecting, too much in the way of trouble, probably pickpockets and pervy people, because there were a lot of teenage girls expected, and that's kind of what they were looking out for. And then at 20 to 11 or so, a friend of mine from Ireland messaged me and said, "Are you all okay?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Oh, there's been a bomb blast at the arena." And I said, straight away, panic. John's on shift, so absolutely lost my mind for the next hour or so. I only messaged once because I knew if he was okay, he would be in the midst of things. Eventually, in the early hours of the morning, got a message back, "I'm okay. Talk to you tomorrow." So as soon as
he's got a job to do, isn't he? So
exactly,
as much as he probably wants to tell you he's okay, he's got to look after the general public and
absolutely
he's in the mix of it. Yeah, that's crazy.
So that kind of worried night, and the next day I went straight out to him, and it was a very sunny day. I'll never forget it, because he was just sitting outside the front of his house, and the tears just streaming down his face, because it was the most, even though he had done all of that time in the Navy, it was just the most awful thing. And he confided in me about the people he had tried to help, about how they had no first aid supplies in those first few minutes. It was just him. He had a trainee with him, so him and his trainee went into it. He said he knew what it was because it sounded like the gun going off on a warship.
Oh, right.
So, you know,
Wow.
it was a familiar sound to him, so he knew that it
He
was
knew,
bad.
he
And
knew the sound
yet,
of it, an explosion, basically. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Wow.
And yet, he and his trainee were in there within 30 seconds.
I
You
think
know,
that's what makes people like John so special. He was obviously a special
hmm
guy, other than being a BTP officer. But people in them roles, it's always said, isn't it? Like everyone's fleeing, and they're the people running the opposite direction into it. And I think that's what makes
absolutely.
people like that. Like I don't think people stop and realize that very often. That, they're the ones that are. You probably want to run away, but they know they've got a duty to do, and they have to run towards it, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's it. And in that moment, because I asked him afterwards, I said, in that moment, you didn't know if there was a secondary device or
No,
what it was,
no.
even that had exploded. You didn't know if it was a person or a machine or something that had gone wrong. And he said, but that was my training in the Navy. You're trained not to think primarily of your
Yeah.
own life. You're trained to think of the purpose.
But you go,
And he
your
said
duty
that
comes
was
first, kind of thing, and
exactly,
what you're meant to be doing.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I said, "You do realize that that would have meant you didn't come home to me?" And he said, "Yeah, well, you think about that afterwards,
yeah,
but that's not, that's not what you're trained to think, you
yeah,
know." So sure enough, the aftermath of that, listeners will know, especially those
yeah.
around Manchester, what happened throughout the city and everything else, was that there were newspaper articles about them all as heroes, and it was a word that John wasn't particularly comfortable with. They did interviews for Granada Reports and the news and everything else. He got a highly commended award from the police for bravery. He also then got mentioned in the Queen's New Year's Honours List the following year. He was awarded an MBE.
Oh, wow.
Um, and that meant that we got to go off to the ceremony where he was awarded his British Empire Medal, but then also to the garden party at the palace, at Buckingham
Very
Palace for the
nice.
day. So all of that together just made our whole time together like something out of TV. You couldn't script that
Yeah,
as people's relationship. There were awards nights where he would be invited along, and we'd go in black tie. I'm trying to think what one of them was. Done by Variety, the children's charity,
all right. Yeah,
invited them all, the first responders, to acknowledge again their response. And just all of those events and things that we did were just made bookended the relationship with the most incredible things, but also that underlying recovery from the trauma of what he had been through.
yeah,
So his blood pressure certainly suffered as a result, but he had always tended to have kind of high blood pressure. So when it came to eventually, John left the BTP because it was a difficult thing to deal with. So he left the transport police, and COVID lockdown started. So he thought, how can I just help? So he started delivering groceries with Tesco. He was driving one of the food vans because that's what people needed.
yeah. Definitely.
Um, yeah.
We
So
we were some of them because obviously, as you know, my wife has an illness. We were stuck
yeah,
in the house and we couldn't go out, and them deliveries were lifesavers really for us because we wouldn't have been able to go out otherwise, really. And
absolutely.
it's you can't really rely on friends and family all the time, can you, to do stuff like that for you when limited supplies. As you know, it was a bit of a crazy time. So yeah,
Absolutely crazy time. And I have an autoimmune condition myself. So I was really self conscious about him bringing COVID home.
yeah.
So bless him, I'd make him strip at the front door and go and shower.
Well, I think we spoke about that before because when I started going back
Yeah,
to work, I had like a decontamination zone in the hallway, which I'm pretty sounds like
yeah,
you had the same thing where I'd put my clothes in
absolutely.
a bag and they'd instantly get washed, and I'd go straight and have a shower and hand
Yeah.
sanitize everything. And yeah, it was a strange, bizarre uh,
It was
time, wasn't
something surreal,
it?
absolutely surreal.
Yeah.
So in the midst of all of that, we went into the second lockdown, and John had applied to, so in the Navy, he had been a chef. He had been a
Okay.
Killick chef, and he applied to the NHS. Again, a step up in the how can I help thing. He was going to go back to cooking for the NHS. He had been successful at interview, and he was taking a week off from delivering for Tesco just before he started with the NHS the following Monday. And that Monday morning, I woke up to homeschool my son, uh, my son has additional needs, and so that in itself was challenging. He has ADHD. He's on the autism pathway. Because let's just throw something else into the mix
I
of
was gonna
Cat's
say
life.
just
Always a bit of
just 'cause you
drama.
need a bit of extra things going on, don't you?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
exactly. Bit more spice on there. Why not? Um, he's a cracking lad. He's absolutely brilliant. But it's not been without its challenges. So
No,
we
I
were
bet.
homeschooling. Yeah, we were homeschooling because he had just started on medication. He'd literally just been diagnosed, and I was downstairs trying to balance working from home, writing COVID guidance for people who had to come to work on the railway and how to manage their decontaminations and PPE and everything else. And Sam on the side of me homeschooling, freaking out because a maths teacher had a squeaky voice and he couldn't bear it. Uh, and we worked all the way through the morning, and John slept in. And at one point, he messaged me and he said, "Gosh, I feel really dizzy." So I thought nothing more of it. He was prone to tinnitus, ear infections. I thought, oh, maybe that's what it is. I said, go back to sleep, try and sleep it off, babe, and I'll see how you're doing kind of later on in the afternoon.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It's kind
sure
of like a
enough,
normal thing to
once
do, really, isn't it? Like,
yeah, exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
All he was dizzy. He was getting up and down to the loo, fine, no problem. So Sam finished up school and I went upstairs and I was like, how are you doing? He said, I'm really bad with this dizziness. So I said, well, what does it feel like? And he just said, it's not just, I don't just feel lightheaded. He said the room is tilting, like it's bad.
Wow.
So we rang 111, and when the only symptom was dizziness, they were like, what do you want us to do, kind of thing. So it continued on for another couple of hours, and as it did, he started to get sick. Physically vomiting, ran a fever, and next thing, he was talking funny.
Right.
And I thought, are you being a bit daft? Like, are you being, are you having me on?
Like playing,
Yeah,
like playing the
exactly.
CAD or something like that. Or,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Because he was just daft as a brush, and he kind of looked at me and he was like, "No, this, I just feel really strange." And at this point, I thought, "Oh man, there's something going on here that is bigger than just what I was worried about, which was actually COVID. I'll be
Yeah,
honest."
yeah, yeah.
So we called back 111, and I said, "Look, he's slurring his words. Now his face hadn't fallen or anything else, but sounded like his tongue was swollen. That's what it sounded like. That kind of
Like you got something in your
blocked
mouth
noise."
kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. Anyway, it took another couple of hours for us to figure out that John was having a stroke. And once we did and called 999, it took a couple of hours for the ambulance to arrive because it was COVID times.
Yep.
And when they did, he was still conscious. He couldn't get himself down the stairs, but he managed to, in the ambulance, shift himself from the chair onto the bed and move his legs about and stuff. He had no problem with his arms, and even then his face hadn't really fallen, like you're told happens when somebody's having a stroke.
As they kind of
So
make out that's like one of the big symptoms, don't they? They kind of
exactly,
say like
yes, that used
that's
to
the
look
thing that
face,
happens.
arms,
Like,
speech.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I kissed him and I said, I love you and I will talk to you later. I'll give you a ring, because I wasn't allowed to go in the ambulance with him. COVID precautions.
COVID times. Yep.
So,
Well, that must have been tough in itself. Obviously, you kind of didn't know the outcome at the time, but just to say,
no,
just to know how serious it could be, and not be able to get in the back of the ambulance. I mean, I can't even imagine what that would be like. To be honest,
that's it. And the paramedic said, we do think you've had a stroke. Now, I've had people in the family who've had a stroke before who have survived.
yeah,
Not just survived, but made a full recovery from partial paralysis or whatever. So in my head, genuinely in my head, the worst case scenario was John might need some looking after when he
yes,
gets back,
yeah,
you know, and if I have to do that, then that's fine, not a problem. Whatever it is, if I have to make a bedroom downstairs, we'll make it work. It'll be okay. But I managed to get some sleep. So I managed to talk to him about 2 a.m. I called his mobile and somebody in the hospital answered and said, "Oh, I'll bring it over to him." He was still waiting on a trolley in a corridor somewhere, although he had a CAT scan at that point. And he said, I'm starting to struggle to swallow, but I'm going to see if I can get some sleep. I love you. I'll talk to you in the morning. And I said, I love you, babes. Talk to you tomorrow. And at 7:30, I fell asleep at some point. At 7:30, my mobile rang, and somebody said to me, a woman, I think the first voice, said, "John, You need to come into the hospital, please. And again, she hadn't said anything else, only you need to try and get into hospital. My thought was, I've got an 11-year-old boy
Yeah.
here. He's got schooling. There's no. It didn't click why she would have been saying that. I said, just give me a few minutes to try and sort out, because I wasn't driving like a taxi, and see what my son is doing. Anyway, I had another telephone call within the next 10 minutes from a man, the consultant this time, saying, I don't know what the last person said to you, but John is dead.
Oh my God.
And I think I wet myself.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it doesn't register.
No.
But it doesn't happen like it does in the movies either. There's no big scream and fall to the floor.
No.
It doesn't, I don't know what, it just doesn't compute at that stage at all. Only that at that point I thought, right, I have to get to the hospital. I rang Sam's dad and I said, can you take the day off work? Can you just take Sam, please? And all credit to him, he did. And then I had to ring John's brother. So John's brother and dad lived together. His mum had died a number of years previously. I had told him the night before that John had gone into hospital with a suspected stroke, but I had to ring him and tell him that his brother was dead without even seeing him myself, without even really believing it myself.
Yeah, and I think you've probably not even absorbed it yourself at that point, and you're transferring this message that kind of isn't tangible.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's.
John was 46.
Yeah.
His brother 42. I barely remember the conversation. Only I said, look, we've been asked to come into hospital so that we can see him. So if you and your dad can come in, then please come in. I'm on my way in now. And then I left and I got a taxi, and I realized I had no money for the taxi and I hadn't brought anything with me. And I was lucky that the local taxi firm were like, we know where you live, don't worry about it. You're going to need one on the way back. So just ring me, and I think he gave me his number. I can't remember. We'll get you on the way back. And so I went in, and they did do the whole, taking me into a room with a consultant and a nurse, and explaining what happened, which was that it crashed. At 1 minute he was sitting there waiting to have bloods done, and the next he just crashed. And I can only assume that because of COVID protocols, they all had to go and get PPE on before they could do CPR. Ultimately, everything just led to the fact that they weren't able to get him back. And so I just said, can I see him? And they said yes. And they just brought me into a side room. He was in a bay, and he was just lying there, fresh as a daisy, in his animal underpants and a t-shirt. And I just sat and held his hand for as long as they would let me. His dad and brother came in, stayed an hour or so, and left. I stayed until they asked me to leave because they had to take him to the mortuary.
Yeah.
And then I walked out into the car park with a shopping bag with his slippers and his mobile phone and his wallet in. And I thought, what the fuck do I do now?
Yeah, I think. Oh, I've heard this story before, Kat, as you know, and it's very emotional for me because I think about my own situation of what I would do. Probably anyone would think about their own situation, what you would do in that situation, and I think that part strikes me the most is like, they kind of just say, right, you can go now, kind of thing. Here's a bag, but like cheerio. That's almost how it is. Like, and I know like people that work in that industry and the most caring, empathetic people you can kind of get, but they're also like kind of the worst as well because they deal with that stuff all the time. They can be very like blasé about it as well. There's a bit of a juxtaposition between care workers because even in my job that I used to have, like you have to cut yourself off from feelings because you've got the next person to go to, and I'm sure John was very similar in his role. To be fair, but that part of that story is the thing that gets me in that story is him going off to hospital alone, and then you leaving the hospital alone with just a bag of his stuff, and that all happens in such a condensed time frame that I can't even imagine. I can try to imagine that situation, but it's unfathomable for me to think of,
Yeah,
and
and
how
it's
you got through
unfathomable for
that.
anyone to think of,
Yeah.
because I couldn't have imagined it
No.
until it happened. Um, and it changed everything.
Yeah.
Everything. I did call that taxi man back, but I had to go. I couldn't stand. I had to go and find something to sit on
Yeah. Yeah.
in a car park in a hospital that I didn't know. Um, thank goodness my phone was still charged, so I don't know what I would have done. But the nurse who saw me out the door, I could see that she wanted to do more, but that her hands were tied. The fact that there
Yeah.
is no service, no facility for them to say there's a room you can go and sit in
Yeah.
if you need to, there's someone on site here that you can talk to if you need to, or here's a taxi number, even nothing,
Yeah.
nothing, you know um but I mean, gosh, it wasn't on them in the midst of COVID. It really
And
wasn't.
I think that's the problem as well. Like, if it would have been a normal time frame of like day to day life, the situation might have been, obviously the outcome wouldn't have been any different, but
Hmm.
the situation of how it was handled potentially would have been completely different. Like, you, for one, you'd been in the back of the ambulance potentially, maybe, or or
Yes,
at least following shortly after potentially, and knowing that you could just go and sit with him, and there'd be no issue with that.
that's
Um,
it. Or I mightn't have spent the day thinking he had COVID and might have got him help earlier. Who
exactly,
knows? But I've
exactly.
tormented myself with that one for a long time.
And I think that's, I was
you
about to
know
say that, like, how does that sit in your mind? I'm sure it
oh,
does.
totally.
And
Totally. I keep thinking I should have just dragged him down the
yeah,
stairs. Even if it had hurt him, I should have just dragged him down the stairs and got some help somehow, got a neighbor to drive us something instead of sitting there waiting for an ambulance like an idiot. But, you know, uh, the only thing I can say is I didn't for a second think that he was dying.
no, no.
He was sitting there beside me cracking jokes and rubbing me knee.
Yeah, and
That
I
was.
think that's the strange thing, isn't it? When you're in that sort of situation, he sounds like the sort of person very much like my dad, who's ex-military. Even when
Mhm.
he's really ill, he'll crack a joke, and he'll kind of put off how ill he is anyway, and he'll just be kind of making the best of it in some sense. So, um, yeah, you don't always think the worst, do you? Especially when someone is
No.
healthy and that some sort of thing just comes out the blue like that. And as you say, with that underlying COVID thing, COVID had so many. I think they were coming up with a new symptom every day, saying, and dizziness and all that
Mhm.
sort of stuff was a
Yeah.
symptom of COVID. Because when I got COVID, I felt terribly dizzy, so
Yeah.
it was definitely a symptom. So yeah, it was, yeah. So I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's the what ifs, and what if I'd have done this, and as easy to say you shouldn't beat yourself up. You're always going to. There's in some way, but it's how do you cope with that, and how do you get through that, and how do you make peace with that,
That's it.
and
You
I,
go through every little thing,
yeah.
every conversation you had, every every moment that we had. I even I even convinced myself at one point, before we knew after a while that it had been what they call a posterior circulation stroke,
Right.
which is a stroke at the back of the brain, which is why he didn't have the face, arm, speech
Ah.
symptoms.
Right.
So that only happens with an anterior stroke. If it's a posterior stroke, it's a bleed at the back of the brain, and dizziness and nausea are generally the only symptoms before things get very, very serious, which is why they're more deadly.
Right.
Um, I, we had had the night before a really crap tea, and it was Sunday night, and usually we would have something pretty tasty of a Sunday, whether it be, John was used to do a cracking roast. Obviously, he was a chef; he used to do an amazing roast. Or we'd have his absolute favorite tea was southern fried chicken, sweet corn chips, because he
Oh.
grew up in America. Or I'll tell you a bit about that in a bit, about why he was in America.
No worries.
But uh, that would be our usual kind of Sunday fare, and there'd be some telly and stuff. But this particular Sunday, we had been doing some jobs, building a chest of drawers upstairs, and just generally busy. So we had a crap tea, and a crap tea was a slow cooker gammon and potato smiley faces out of the freezer, because that was literally all we had. I mean, gammon and smiley faces, how could you go wrong? But I somehow, in the hours afterwards, when I was at home and sitting here on my own, convinced myself that I had left the plastic on the gammon and poisoned him. Bec-
Really?
Because where else does your head go thinking, what if I did something? What if this was my fault?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
somebody might knock on my door? Just all these crazy, crazy thoughts go through your head, and you're just not in your right mind with grief at all. At all.
I'm very much an in my head person, so I think I can kind of think about what you were probably kind of postulating in your own brain of what
Yeah.
could have what could have been, and what was it something you did or not do, or and
did he pull something carrying the chest of
Exactly.
drawers up the stairs? What could it have been?
Trained himself or something like that.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. In the end. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I think that's the thing that probably will lead us on to is what is going to be part 2 is how do you recover from that, and how do you make peace, and how do you move forward. And I know that you tell that story so emotively, but without getting upset. And I don't know how you do that. I don't know, like, how I was teary-eyed a couple of times during that. It probably doesn't come through the webcam because I'm going invisible sometimes, apparently. So, but it's such an emotive story, and I don't want to say you're so strong to do it, but you cope with it so well. Like the way you handle it is so it's I suppose it's so strong to the way you handle it. I don't want to sound like cliched about it, if you know what I mean. But you've just got a grace about the way you talk about him, and you obviously had like an amazing time when you were together.
Oh,
and
it was extraordinary.
Yeah, and
I'll always describe him as just sunshine in a person. That's what he was. If
Sunshine in a
anyone was
person.
going to make you laugh, yeah, absolutely. If anyone could make you laugh, it was John. And if anyone was going to stop and help you when you needed it, it was also John. That was just him through and through. And yes, it was all tied up with a bit of salty sailor bodiness, but that made it all the more fun.
I think you need a bit of that sprinkled in as well, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll leave part 1 there, Kat. I think that's probably leaving on that ray of sunshine kind of thing that John was. I think it's probably a good place to leave it for part 1, and then we'll come back in part 2 where Kat will hopefully tell us about what she's been up to since John's passing, and how she's been coping with it, and what she's been up to in her personal life to help other people. I would say would that be the right way of putting it? That sounds about right. I think. Yeah, I think. Sometimes my words don't come out the way I want them to. So, yes.
That was good.
So, well, thank you very much for joining us in part 1, Kat.
It's been a pleasure.
It'll be probably a couple of weeks for other people, but it'll be right back for us. So, yeah, thank you very much for listening, everyone. Please like, comment, share your experiences, and links to Kat's Facebook and Instagram will be in the link in the description if you want to know anything about what she does. And if you want to know what she does, you can listen to part 2. So thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to Infinite Prattle with your host, Stephen. Follow me on social networks at Infinite Prattle, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks very much.